There's no doubt about it. It's a very, very difficult time. We've got a land war in Europe and in Russia, a president who is openly critical of the Western system.
Interesting, isn't it? A view on Ofsted's approach towards teachers and indeed their well-being.
Yes, I think we've got a whole issue here about authority. Who is the authority? Is it teachers who should be respected in terms of being able to control their schools? There are a number of incidents going on, including some involving the ARC schools run by Miss Bubble Singh, that outspoken one, where there's an argument going on over whether students should be allowed to have prayer time. She's stopped that because she says it's not a religious school, it's a secular school, and also it's disrupting other pupils. So who is in charge? Is it the teachers or is it Ofsted, which is the superior authority, if you like, passing judgment on the quality of education? I think there's a sort of three-way argument between parents and pupils' rights, teachers' rights, and then the authority above the teachers at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just astounding to hear that there are these sort of no-go zones in certain schools where teachers just don't feel that they're safe to go in. We'll speak to a teachers' union after 8 o'clock to get more details on that. Interestingly as well, Adam, that there has been a lot of pressure exerted on Ofsted to change this one-word grading, whether that is good, outstanding, needs improving, or is unsatisfactory. I mean, Labour has for quite a long time now said it would expand on that. And I mean, if you read an Ofsted report, there is more detail, there is more flesh on the bone, but many people are still uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, and Ofsted have said they're going to change following the death of the headmistress, Ruth Perry. It's extraordinary to a certain extent how her death and her decision to take her own life has resonated with the feeling that, perhaps the people from Whitehall, as it were, as Ofsted are often seen, were just too peremptory, and that this idea of a one-word grading was not sufficient. So I think we are going to see changes with Ofsted, but at the same time, we do have to remember that parents do want to see ratings of their schools. They want to know, anyone who's got children in school wants to know how their school is performing and wants it to be brought up to standard if they're failures. I think the problem with the Perry case in particular was that the ruling against the school was technical on the whole question of safeguarding, where everyone accepted that as a school, in terms of education and the management of most pupils, an excellent job was being done. So it appeared to be very unfair. And that's why I think Ofcom are having to rethink this.
Also, a big story later on this morning around 11:30. It is expected that Tata Steel will confirm that it is going to close both its blast furnaces at Port Talbot. More than 3,000 jobs to be lost in South Wales. And I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier on about this, Adam. There's so many dimensions to this story. There is the devastation to that local community and those 3,000 workers and their families and all of the connecting businesses. But for the planet, this is a good news story because carbon emissions are going to be cut by 90%.
Yeah, I mean, that is the issue. I think I'm right in saying that Port Talbot is the sort of biggest single polluter or emitter of carbon. And of course, if they do move away from coal-fired blast furnaces towards this electrical arc furnace, which at the moment is theoretical, it doesn't exist, it will have to be built. There will be benefits to the environment. But the argument, I think, which the unions have been putting forward, a number of unions, is that there needs to be a transition so that a blast furnace can continue to operate until the new furnace is ready. That would certainly soften the blow in terms of job losses. And I mean, I have to say, having covered many stories about changes in the steel industry, it's not over till it happens. That very often large amounts of government subsidy are coming in. We know that Tata has been offered, I think, £500 million to make this transition. And quite often the politicians are able to exact pledges in the other direction. So we'll have to wait and see precisely what Tata has to say. But there's no doubt about it that the blast furnaces are the heart of the industry and really the local activity, the town, the local economic activity in Port Talbot, and therefore a sudden closure, which seems to be being trailed, would indeed be a shock and have a major impact.
Yeah. Let's talk as well about, I mean, we talked so much, haven't we, about Rwanda, the Rwanda bill. Reporting in the Times today that the Home Office has hired a hanger to practice forcing migrants onto Rwanda flights. In practice, what does this actually mean?
Well, I think in practice it means that it just gets worse for the government. What we have is the Prime Minister yesterday giving a news conference and insisting that because the Commons narrowly had voted for this measure and the Conservative Party was united, it was, quotes, the will of the people. Well, I think the problem is that if you look at any opinion survey or indeed discussion they had last night on BBC Question Time, it's quite clear that there is not anything like overwhelming public support for pressing on with this Rwanda scheme, given the problems, given the cost, given the fact that it hasn't worked so far. And I think images or even the idea of civil servants, effectively being trained as bouncers to force people onto planes is not going to, I mean, it's sensible, but I don't think it's going to improve the public image of this scheme. And we do have to remember that Stansted Airport, for example, has said that it will not play host to the planes that are going to take off. It's not clear that the government has secured one of those planes that can actually do the job as yet, nor is it clear that they've got an airfield that's going to operate. They're talking about using a military airport, Boscombe Down, for that. But again, there are questions about its capacity to cope with this sort of activity. So the practical problems of making this work are just getting more difficult and more expensive. We'll have to wait and see. What's interesting is that the Prime Minister yesterday, on a visit to Border Force at Gatwick Airport, went back on the idea and re-emphasized that he's hoping to get this all done by spring, that he hopes to have people on planes by the end of April. Well, it looks as if Parliament will barely be finished with debating this, let alone the legal and practical issues being out of the way by then.
I must ask you as well, Adam, before you go, this was slightly alarming story that the West must plan for war with Russia within 20 years, says a warning, an admiral from NATO. That will alarm many people.
Yes, it will. And of course, it's of a piece with what the Defense Secretary, Grant Shapps, said this week in a speech where he suggested that the world was moving from a post-war phase into a pre-war phase. And there is no doubt, and again, we had David Cameron this week saying that the lights were flashing red on the international board, if you like, of danger signals. There's no doubt about it. It's a very, very difficult time. We've got a land war in Europe and in Russia, a president who is openly critical of the Western system. We've got the same now going on in the Red Sea with the Houthis disrupting in spite of repeated American led assaults on Houthi missile and strategic sites. They're still managing to threaten ships in the Red Sea, effectively causing a blockade on a third of world trade. So it's a very, very dangerous situation. And we do have wars also going on, as we know, in Israel and Gaza. So I think what we are seeing now is that the international security experts are trying to change public consciousness and say, look, your common assumptions that most of us live in peaceful times, there really are actors around the world and countries around the world that appear to be threatening that assumption. And we need to respond to it. As we know, in the UK, there's now a very active argument about having to increase our defence spending after years of decline.